Israel and Hamas, the Islamist group that runs the Gaza Strip, have agreed on a truce to end a flare-up in cross-border fighting. This according to two Palestinian officials. There was no immediate response coming from Israel. A Palestinian official with knowledge of the ceasefire talks, which of course were mediated by Egypt, said the truce will begin at 20:45 GMT. Israeli aircraft struck more than 150 targets in Gaza on Wednesday night and on Thursday. Palestinian militants had fired scores of rockets, including a long-range missile, deep into Israeli territory. Now, few casualties were reported in Israel, but in Gaza, a young Palestinian woman and her one-year-old child were killed in the Israeli retaliation strikes. Medical sources in Gaza confirming that woman was also pregnant.
Today we're going to look at the situation in Israel and the Palestinian territories. Violence has flared up again this week, with dozens of rockets fired into Israel and scores of targets in Gaza hit by the Israeli military. The latest rocket landed in an open area near Beersheba, which required a more powerful, longer-range rocket, and is being seen somewhat as an escalation in the unrest. The military has once again hit back, hitting what we're being told is a cultural centre in Gaza City. So where might things go from here? Peace talks had been underway in Egypt with new hope that progress was being made. So could things calm down again quickly, or are we headed for all-out war? Well, to give us their opinions, we're joined from Gaza by Mr. Mukhaimir Abu Saada, a professor of political scientist at Al-Azhar University. Thanks for your time. Also joining us from Tel Aviv, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, a former spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces. Thanks to both of you for being with us, Lieutenant Colonel Lerner. Perhaps I'll start with yourself, as that latest news we're getting is that the Israeli military has carried out another airstrike over Gaza City this Thursday, apparently hitting a cultural centre.
So the military has yet to announce exactly what it was striking at this location. We can be sure what we've seen over the last 24 hours is a very crafted, designed plan of action to take out Hamas assets. Those assets which are part of the operations that they're conducting, whether it's firing rockets, whether it's weapon storage, whether it's command and control positions or communications positions. These types of things are being targeted in order to send Hamas a clear message. You have a lot to lose in this confrontation. You have to think well if you continue to try and conduct these rocket attacks against Israel.
Let me cross just briefly to Mr. Abu Saada in Gaza. You're in Gaza. What do you know about that latest strike? Was it targeting another Hamas centre?
There is no Israeli justification for attacking and bombing a cultural center here in the middle of Gaza City. Everybody knows this is a cultural center which basically present cultural events for the Palestinians in Gaza and has nothing to do with Hamas or the military wing of Hamas. And let me also alert
unless
you
it was
and
being
alert your
used
guest
by
also that
Hamas,
Israel,
if let's say they could have used that building, taken it over.
I have no idea. All I know that this is in the center of Gaza City. It's a very crowded area with Palestinian civilians in that area. There are no Hamas military installations or any training camps for Hamas around that area. All I know that this is a building that is a cultural center that belongs to the and also, as a matter of fact, there is an office for the Egyptian community in the Gaza Strip, which is also housed in the same building which was attacked and bombed by Israel today. And let me just alert you and alert your guests that this is not the first incident. Israel last night bombed a house in the middle of Gaza City, which killed a pregnant woman and her 18-month child, and her husband is in severe conditions being treated in the hospital right now. I mean, every time.
Well, let me put that question to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. Lieutenant Colonel, hearing there from the professor in Gaza City saying that you might be targeting Hamas, but it's civilians that are paying the heavy price.
Absolutely, the civilians are always paying the price, whether it's Hamas shooting rockets at Israeli civilians or Hamas hiding behind those civilians, those poor people in Gaza that are literally being held hostage by this terrorist organization.
But even
the realization that Hamas is using these people
Even if Hamas, let's accept that Hamas, even if they are using the civilians, it's the Israeli military that is carrying out the action. It's still breaking international law. In that sense, you're still targeting civilians. Sorry.
Absolutely not. Over the course of the last 24 hours, the IDF has announced that they've conducted some 180 precision strikes against locations which are involved in Hamas's terrorist industry. The realization that this industry must be destroyed is actually up to Hamas. They have to decide if they want to continue the aggression against the state of Israel. Israel doesn't want to have another war with Gaza. I think the reality on the ground is one where over the last 2 months there have been extreme efforts on behalf of the Egyptians and the United Nations to try and come to some sort of situation to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Gaza on one hand, and on the other hand, improve the security situation and Israel's legitimate security concerns that we have from the terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. That needs to be ironed out. I think the coming hours will show where it is actually going.
Cross back to Professor Abu Saada in Gaza City. What do you think Hamas wants?
Well, first, Eve, let me just remind your guest, Colonel Lerner, that Israel knows very much where their Hamas training camps and where are the bases of Hamas. And as it was mentioned by Israel today, that around 150 targets that belong to Hamas were targeted, but there is no Israeli explanation for targeting this cultural center in the middle of Gaza City and also targeting a pregnant woman with her 18-child last night. Anyway, this did not start with Hamas. This started with the Israeli army when the Israeli army targeted Palestinian militant 2 days ago and killed 2 members of Hamas military wing, Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades. And Hamas did not respond that day because a high-level delegation from Hamas was inside Gaza, and Hamas decided to retaliate yesterday. So it all started by Israel 2 days ago.
Okay, but Professor Abu Saada, we did have 180 or so rockets fired to the other side. What do the Palestinian people think about that?
Well, let me put it to you this way. The Palestinian people are under Israeli occupation for the past 50 years. We are in Gaza under Israeli siege and blockade for the past 12 years. Life here is unbearable. When you look at the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, it's going from bad to worse. Poverty is about 70% of the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza live under poverty line. Unemployment among the Palestinians, 44 as a result of this Israeli siege and blockade. And the Palestinian people, they would like to live as normal human beings. It's the Israeli occupation, the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people who are not allowing the Palestinians to live a normal life.
Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, that blockade has been in place for years now. It was aimed at bringing peace. That clearly isn't working. Is it time to end the blockade, give civilians a rest and come up with a new strategy?
So the reality on the ground is that Hamas is actually controlling the ability to alleviate the situation. Instead of alleviating it, they prefer to shoot rockets. They don't want shipments of goods or anything. They want to shoot rockets at Israel. I think what my friend is actually saying is that, and rightly so, is, you know, Hamas is in charge of the Gaza Strip. They have to look out for the well-being and the development of the Gaza Strip. But instead of investing in that, they're investing in hundreds and thousands of rockets. They're investing in tunnels which are going nowhere. They're investing in naval capabilities which are only tools of death and destruction, something Israel can't accept. So I would suggest to my friend in Gaza, please go to Hamas, please tell them to stop firing rockets at Israel because it won't get them anywhere. Israel is in a situation where it cannot accept being under fire, cannot accept being targeted. Our civilians today running from one moment to the next, every few minutes to the bomb shelters, just because Hamas doesn't like Israel being here. I'll tell you what, we're not going anywhere. The reality on the ground has to reflect that understanding, and Hamas needs to come to that conclusion. Israel is here to stay. Please, instead of investing in terrorism, invest in the life of the people of Gaza. They deserve it.
Professor Abu Saada, what have you to say to that?
Well, I truly say that, yes, I mean, it's Colonel's right to say that Israel does not accept launching of rockets from Gaza against Israel, but I want Colonel Lerner to just imagine if Israel were under occupation for 50 years, and if Israel were under siege and blockade, and if Israel were under collective punishment by its neighbors. Would Israel or will Colonel Lerner accept this situation? This is all started as a result of Israel ignoring international law, ignoring international humanitarian law and the Fourth Geneva Convention by targeting Palestinian civilians, by imposing collective punishment on 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And I mean, at the end of the day, the Palestinians are not happy to see another flare of violence or eruption of violence between Hamas and Israel. But let's say, as I mentioned to you earlier, it all started by Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip 2 days ago, which killed 2 Palestinians.
Professor Abu Saadab, however, what is Hamas's strategy? Because these rockets are being fired during peace talks that we were hearing were going very well. What's their strategy?
That is completely true. Yes, there have been advanced back-channel negotiations between Hamas and Israel carried out by the Egyptians and by the UN envoy, Mr. Nikolai Miladinov, who are trying to broker a long ceasefire or a truce between Hamas and Israel. And from what I know is that these back-channel negotiations have reached an advanced point, which we probably are where to see the final touches on this deal. But unfortunately, violence erupted again. And as I mentioned to you, it all started by Israel 2 days ago when Israel killed 2 Palestinians.
And Hamas
cross
back to Lieutenant Colonel
to retaliate back.
Lieutenant Colonel Lerner, or the professor pointed out there that the economic restrictions on the Gaza Strip does predate Hamas and when they came to power.
I think what's important, though, to remember is Hamas came to power in 2007. And they had the ability to turn the Gaza Strip into a development.
But Gaza was already under pressure economically before Hamas.
That's all the more reason to invest in the people. But rather than invest, so all of these restrictions that Israel is enforcing, whether it's a maritime blockade, because what happened? We've stopped ship after ship after ship of rockets being shipped to Gaza. We don't want more rockets to come to Gaza. They've got enough anyway.
So what's the solution?
On the other hand, we don't want
what's the solution? If Hamas stops rocket fire, is Israel willing to let economic benefits into Gaza?
You know, the whole time Israel has been saying, Hamas, stop terrorism, invest in the people of Gaza, and let's move forward. You know, the restrictions and the closure around the Gaza Strip, whether it's movement, travel, access, those are all a result of the security situation. You know, we have a neighbor here that is not willing to accept the fact that we live here. And instead of trying to develop a relationship, a neighborly relationship, they are hostile towards the state of Israel. Israel is sitting on its hands most of the time. And when we are pushed into a situation, into a corner, so to say, we will respond. You know, you wouldn't accept the reality.
Let me just ask you, how worried should we be about this recent flare-up of violence again? You know, could it calm down quickly, or has this completely scuppered those truce talks? Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, first of all.
I don't think so. I believe that the reality and the ritual that we are going through is something we've seen since the 30th of March, when Hamas initiated the exchanges on the fence. And every few weeks since then, we've had a flare-up of this type of violence. The problem is that we are always seem to be on the brink of the conflict. So I would be very cautious in trying to predict where it is actually going. I think it could go either way. I think if one side makes a mistake, a fatal mistake, it could lead to an escalation. You know, the whole thing, the whole events of the current 24 hours began when IDF forces misidentified snipers would fire towards them. And this reality is reality, and it is the dynamics of the religion that we need to be quite concerned with.
Okay, let me just put that same question to Professor Abu Saadab in Gaza. How worried are you that this latest upsurge in violence could turn things really in the wrong direction, bring us back towards 2014?
To be honest with you, we are very worried. This is the worst escalation between Hamas and Israel since the end of 2014 war in the summer of 2014. Last night, most of the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza were not able to sleep as a result of continued Israeli bombing of different areas in the Gaza Strip, mainly civilian populated areas. It's very much well known that Gaza is overpopulated. It's a very small place with 2 million Palestinians. We do hope that this latest escalation will be contained very quickly by outside mediators, either by Egypt or by the UN envoy, Mr. Miladinov. But if that does not succeed, then unfortunately we might facing another bloody military confrontation between Israel and the Palestinian resistance in Gaza.
Okay, well, let's end on that note for a hope that this will all calm down quickly again and those truce talks continue. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both very much for your time. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner and Professor Mughal Abu Saada, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this debate on France 24 and the end of this edition.